Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. A 3-month aid blockade, a widening offensive on Gaza. Has Israel finally crossed the red line that its Western allies can no longer ignore? Across Europe, pressure is building. Lawmakers are calling for a review of relations with Tel Aviv. Everything from trade to diplomatic support. But what could that action actually look like? In Madrid, European and Arab leaders gathered for a rare summit, one that backed a two-state solution. But also heard was a bolder call. Spain's foreign minister demanding an arms embargo on Israel. And the signal from Washington, just as pointed. Earlier this month, President Trump left Israel off his 4-day Middle East tour, snubbing a traditional ally while extending an olive branch to Syria's new leader, Ahmet Alsharaa. That gesture came as Israel intensified strikes across the region, including inside Syria. And on another front, nuclear talks with Iran. Washington and Tel Aviv are no longer on the same page of how to deal with Tehran. So the question is, are the U.S. and Israel heading for a strategic split, or is this just a recalibration? For more, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is former U.S. senior diplomat William Lawrence. A lot to discuss. Now, the U.S.-Israeli relationship generally viewed as probably one of the closest bilaterals in the world. But there seems to be a little bit of a divide lately. William, what's your take on this?
It's mostly from from Trump's personality. Trump wants to sort of magnify the United States and magnify the world, in which people do what he wants or he moves on to other people. And whether it's his own staff, whether it's institutions, whether it's countries, whether it's leaders, if they bend to his will, whatever they say about him, he will work with them. And if they don't, he won't. So in the case of Israel, he wants this, as he's been saying for close to a year now, he wants it wrapped up. And he's willing to give Israel a carte blanche to wrap it up, but he wants it wrapped it up quickly. On the other hand, he wants peace, and he wants something that he can pitch to his Arab and Muslim friends as a solution. And so, there's where we get into these, complicated pronouncements from Trump, whether they're moving everyone to Saudi Arabia or moving them all to Libya from Gaza, which, of course, is a non-starter in the region. But he wants sort of quick fixes. And so, what I predict here is continued strain between the U.S. and Israel. But, until we have a solution, it's going to continue to be sort of thrusting around for an easy fix and a lot of sort of performative quasi-solutions. But we won't really have a sustainable solution until people look at the hard issues to the hard problem.
So, William, during Trump's first term, he kind of positioned himself as Israel's best friend. Is he not the best friend anymore? As you stated, is this just that personal rift between the heads of state?
Well, I think he would continue to call himself Israel's best friend, although that was a sort of different circumstance in which he really needed Jewish votes to win in a close election, which is not as much the case anymore. And certainly he doesn't have to win a second election now. But it's really more that he thinks Israel's best interest is to crush the Palestinians and then impose a peace that then Trump can take credit for, rather than find a way to sort of reduce the bloodshed, which is the way he talks about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and get to ceasefires quickly and then come up with solutions that work for both populations to preserve lives. It's a very different sort of approach here, which is, push the Palestinians quickly out of the way, but then end the war, in a way that just pushes it off the headlines. Going back 6-8 months now, Trump often talks about Gaza and the Israel conflict in general, as a PR issue, rather than anything else. And so as long as the war rages on in the way it's raging on now, Trump takes umbrage because Netanyahu isn't bending to his will. And I don't know if you saw the quotes over the weekend in which advisors close to the White House, close to Trump, were saying that Bibi is the most difficult person he's working with now. And that's because Bibi's not bending to Trump's pronouncement. If I could add one thing, by forcing Israel to try to resolve this quickly, Trump is actually making the situation worse because he's saying, do it any way you want, but end it. And that's why we have this massive mobilization going on now.
But when you say Bibi's the toughest to deal with for Trump, is that any different than the Obama era? I mean, Obama seemed to have a lot of problems with Netanyahu as well.
That's an interesting question. I'd say, yeah, they both had a lot of problems with Bibi, as did, I think, remember the hot mic moment with Macron and others in Europe, about Bibi Netanyahu, because Bibi Netanyahu doesn't bend to others' will, and he thinks he's smarter than everybody and can sort of manipulate them in the ways that he wants. In many ways, he's like Trump in that respect. They're birds of a feather, and they sort of understand each other. And it's that manipulation which has been the most frustrating aspect of the relationship for Trump, in that Bibi always thinks he can outflank, outsmart, and outmaneuver Trump in the public sphere, and Trump is trying to do the same thing back, and that's enormously frustrating for Trump, because he has a complicated job and a lot of portfolios to cover, and Israel keeps being one of the prickly ones in which he can't sort of force his will on the situation by sheer force of personality and applying American power to the situation.
Now, Trump seems to want his legacy to be peace. And he's got 4 children that are potential future presidential candidates. So as far as a president goes, his legacy probably very, very important for him, something he wants to leave to his children for a potential future presidential bid. Now, is Netanyahu a big liability for that legacy?
Possibly. In Trump's mind, he also, of course, wants the Nobel Peace Prize. He thinks he can get it by stopping his 2 wars. But Bibi is definitely a thorn in his side, as insofar as Bibi might, puncture his legacy or make this passing of the torch less possible. I don't think the short-term things that Bibi's doing are really Trump's concern, whether starving the Gazans or killing hundreds of people every week, civilians who deserve to live and deserve more freedom and the possibility to eat food and survive. But Trump wants this over on Israel's terms quickly, to turn the page and then get easy peace, and easy peace through force. This phrase they recycled from the Reagan administration and the Trump administration in the last couple of months is peace through strength. But the way in which they imagine peace through strength is not restrained U.S. power with a big military force that could be used, but rather sort of asserting their will in a sort of bombastic and unpredictable way. And then when people fall into line, claim victory. And when they don't, say that the other side's the problem. And so this sort of peace through strength Trump version is let Bibi Netanyahu assert his strength, kill people on the way, and then try to force a peace on his terms, and then Trump will say that he forced it and then take credit for it.
Earlier you highlighted that Trump's very concerned about the loss of life in Ukraine, but he just wants Gaza over as quick as possible and has just given Netanyahu free rein to end it quickly, regardless of loss of life. Why is that?
I'd say bigotry more than anything else. Trump himself refers to the Ukrainian and Russian soldiers as like us, people dying who are like us, who look like us, who act like us. Whereas brown people, are of a different category. And we saw a version of that white nationalism lately when he tried to embarrass the South African president by claiming that thousands of white crosses in South Africa were part of a genocide and white farmers being killed, when in fact, two farmers had died, and this was just a protest set of crosses someone put up. But it feeds into a number of conspiracy theories about white grievance all around the world, that the white nationalists behind Trump trump up and then try to make part of this saving white people, saving Christians, white nationalism, Christian nationalism, which is part of his base and part of his agenda.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talked about the personal divide between Netanyahu and Trump. I think some of that stems back to 2020 elections when Biden won and Netanyahu quickly congratulated him. Is Trump really holding a personal grudge?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that was the biggest rift before them, and he never fully forgave Bibi. But on the other hand, J.D. Vance did worse things and said worse things. And many of the people around Trump were big Trump critics at some point. So in the end, it gets back to sort of what I've been saying all along, which is that if people bend to his will, no matter what they did or said before, Trump's happy. If they don't, because he has a very, very negative view of human nature and of people in general. So he thinks everybody is saying bad things about him, but then will bend to his will if he applies power on them. And so, if Bibi comes around, even after, let's say he did a 3-month campaign and killed a lot more people and gained control of Gaza, and then the war stopped, and then started saying nice things about Trump and crediting Trump with whatever ceasefire came into place, Trump would quickly forgive him. It's for Trump in the end, it's all about image. It's all about how he's viewed, and if in the end he's viewed okay, because and this is another part of the Trump MO, problems are solved that Trump created, but people don't, necessarily attribute the problems to him and then say he solved that. That's what he wants. So Bibi is creating problems here, but if Bibi then solves them and Trump can take credit for Bibi solving them, then it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seems that this personal divide is also backed up by policy as well, though. Trump, very big on Syria, lifting sanctions, meeting with Syrian President Ahmet Alsharaa. Also, Iran talks, also direct contact with Hamas, which is basically a first between U.S. officials and Hamas. Now, how much of this policy is part of a shift to Asia? Because we're seeing Ukraine, Trump trying to move towards peace. We're seeing Trump trying to disengage from Syria. We're seeing Trump moving towards peace in Gaza. And we're seeing more of a focus on China. So is this bigger than Israel? Is Trump trying to initiate that long-spoken Pacific shift in U.S. foreign policy?
No, the Asia shift was always a myth. It was a myth under Obama. It was a myth under Trump. They basically moved troops around in the Middle East without downsizing. They did increase what the U.S. was doing in Asia, both presidents, and yet it never really amounted to a disengagement from the Middle East. No, Trump is all in on the Middle East because of his relationship with the Gulf monarchies that are helping his own personal bottom line, his family's bottom line, and making all these deals, which he wants to take credit for. So the focus on the Middle East will remain. I think getting back to what I was saying about his negative view, Trump has a very, very negative view of his friends and allies, personally and internationally, and a very, very negative view of his foes, but likes to kind of bring them around. And so he relishes in the idea of dealing with the former terrorist Alsharaa and the designated terrorists that run Iran, and making deals with them like he did with North Korea in the first term, although it failed, and like he's trying to do with Putin, and all of these things. So it's all about dealing with people's basest instincts and a negative view of their character, and then trying to make deals that he can take credit for. And when it's making deals with an enemy, he thinks he's breaking incredible new ground. And when it's making deals with new rifts created with friends and allies, then that's just business as usual. But it's all about him breaking rules and making relationships in new ways.
I want to ask you more about the collective West, though. How about Europe? We're seeing Europe taking a tougher stance against Israel as well. Where is that coming from, and how tough will Europe get on Israel and Netanyahu?
Well, there's a domestic element, an international element, but I think, among other things, the Western allies, and I include in this, Australia and Japan and others, the Western allies are feeling like they can push back on Trump. They're feeling a sort of growing resentment around the world that starts with the tariffs, but extends to a whole number of other issues, including Gaza, in which they can sort of buck Trump, and they can buck him collectively. Now, I'm not sure whether in the short term this is a policy that will work for them, because Trump will just keep slapping tariffs and creating mayhem in the global economy. But ultimately, it will win. And I think they read the Trump psychology, as a bully that needs to be, at times flattered, but eventually pushed back against. And this is part of the pushback. And I expect that to grow over time as the sort of whole world looks at Trump and says, we can do better than this.
William, I want to ask you about the domestic support for Netanyahu right now. I know earlier there were a lot of protests in Israel. Is Netanyahu concerned about how Gaza will turn out, how Syria will turn out, how Lebanon will turn out, and how that's going to impact them domestically?
I think as a secondary issue. I think we've long figured out that Trump knows he needs to keep as many conflicts as possible going for as long as possible to stay in power, stay out of court and out of jail, and to keep his coalition together. So even though I think he does care, about a lot of the humanitarian issues related to Israelis, the soldiers and the hostages and that sort of thing, and the populations of the north, who can't go back to their lands close to Lebanon, and all the different effects on Israelis and Jews around the world of his actions. Ultimately, and like Trump, he's made it clear that his own political survival and his own political dominance and his coalition holding together is the higher priority. And so, this opposition to Netanyahu will only grow over time within Israel.
Mm-hmm. Now, Trump recently mentioned the Abraham Accords again, so it looks like there's still a desire to return to that. Is that even possible with Netanyahu still at the helm?
Kind of. And it's like the way they talk about the two-state solution, because if you're not dangling the Abraham Accords as a way to get ultimate peace and buy-in, between Saudi Arabia and Israel and on a whole set of issues, like the two-state solution, then what are you trying to do? But this is, I think, both talking about two-state solution, talking about the Abraham Accords, is a proxy for actually negotiating sustainable outcomes that work for both sides. It's more of a sort of throwaway comment because the Saudis have made it clear there's going to be no deal with Israel until there's a clear pathway to peace for the Palestinians, and there's no clear pathway to peace for the Palestinians if you're still saying they need to leave.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've seen many Israel-Palestine flare-ups before, but I've never seen the international community, at least the collective West, unified this much. Is Israel more isolated than it has been in near history?
Yeah, and it's been hard to kind of follow this over the years because there's been a steady deterioration of Israel's, reputation in the world, position in the world, but it's so slow. Sometimes it's sort of hard to sort of track the progress. But in the United States, we've gone from about 5% of Americans caring about Palestinians and their welfare to about 25-30% of the population. And on some issues, it's over 50% now. Certainly among Democrats, the pro-Palestinian sentiment is higher than the pro-Israeli sentiment. And that's even higher throughout the Western countries and even higher around the world. And so that works to Israel's detriment, and that works in the Palestinians' favor, even though we're still in a situation now of almost helplessness of the international community before the onslaughts because of the carte blanche that Trump just amped up again, although putting a short timer on it for Netanyahu. It won't be until the Americans and the West and the most powerful countries in the world actually stop Israel from, pursuing its worst actions and following its worst instincts, that this problem will begin to be fixed. And I'm afraid it may not happen until the next conflict, because this one seems like it's going to be ending badly.
No, the diminishing public opinion is very evident. You can see it. Also, some of the rhetoric coming from leaders, some of the action. I mean, in Europe, many countries now recognizing Palestine. Spain even taking a bold step to talk about an arms embargo, people reviewing their diplomatic relations. That public sentiment seems to be spilling over into the policymaking sphere. Do you expect to see any type of meaningful action from any Western countries against Israel, or will this just remain rhetorical?
No, it'll be meaningful. It just won't be enough. I mean, most of those arms come from the U.S. and U.K., and although does seem to be some movement in the U.K. To reduce the number of weapons. Trump reversed the small actions that the Biden administration took to limit weapons and limit their use. And so, again, there will be meaningful actions, and it'll set the stage for the next time this happens. But I don't think it'll be enough this time to really affect the outcome of the pummeling of the cruelty being inflicted on Palestinians. Again, not just in Gaza, but throughout the occupied territories.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you about Turkey as well. I mean, recently at the press conference between Trump and Netanyahu, Trump started praising Erdogan. Now, obviously, Erdogan and Netanyahu have a very public falling out. you can call them adversaries very easily as they verbally engage each other. Was that meant to anger Netanyahu? Was that a Trump move to anger him? And also, is Erdogan now kind of like the major U.S. ally in the region? I mean, you have worked together on Syria. You have worked together on Ukraine regarding peace in Ukraine. And just it seems like the U.S.-Turkey relationship at a high point right now.
I'd say yes and no. Yes, it was a snub. No, Turkey doesn't quite have that position yet. I think in Trump's mind, and this is a foreign policy run by Trump and not by the wider U.S., in Trump's mind, the major ally is Saudi Arabia now. It's not Turkey. But wouldn't it be nice if it was Turkey? Because Turkey is in a position to do a lot more than Saudi Arabia in terms of the issues you raised and several others. Its strength, its geopolitical positioning. And there's a lot of things Turkey could do. And so I do expect an upward trajectory in the U.S.-Turkey relationship, and over time, we'll see whether it takes on a much more dominant role in terms of the U.S. Relationship with the Middle East. But right now, it's ascendant, but not necessarily in that position yet.
I want to also ask one last question about Iran nuclear talks. It looks like Trump really wants to have a new deal, a deal that he can put his stamp on. How much is that going to cause a rift between Israel and the United States? Will Israel work against this or try to be an obstacle? Does Israel want to see a U.S.-Iran war?
It's a problem. They want the war, and they will get in the way. And the main way they'll do it is through the United States. So within the United States, we have many corners of pro-Likud, pro-Israel, right-wing politics that can put significant pressure on Trump. And even within the Trump administration, we have, figures that are more anti-Iran and more willing to make a deal with Iran. The big irony here for people like me, I was opposed to the Iran nuclear deal only because of its effects on the Syria conflict, that the U.S. looked the other way on Syria in order to try to get the Iran deal. But once we had it, it was a good thing. And then Trump pulled out of it, and now he's trying to negotiate a new one, sort of like when he got rid of NAFTA and then did the USMCA, which was just NAFTA 2.0. And it could be JCPOA 2.0, although it'll have different elements to it. But I absolutely believe that Israel would do what it can to scuttle the deal. And it may succeed in that respect, because while the U.S. does want and need a dialogue with Iran and with the parties that are helping this negotiation, Oman, there's some movement and some progress there, and there's some possibilities. I don't expect a fully sustainable working Iran deal that'll solve all the problems with Iran from this administration at this time. Because again, and getting back to the other issues we're discussing and the Ukraine-Russia issue, the Trump administration doesn't spend enough time and doesn't care enough time about the details to actually get sustainable deals that solve all the problems.
Former U.S. senior diplomat William Lawrence, thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.